even supposed to be on this channel.
Cartoon Network is. Ooh, hey, pretty mama.
Johnny! Oh, Cartoon Network's got this thing right. It's called Cartoon Fridays, and we're on it. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Here's the deal. If you're like me or any other kid who grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, then you grew up with these three networks: Disney Channel, Nickelodeon, and Cartoon Network. All three networks competing for your attention because, let's face it, between school and homework, there wasn't much time to spend solely on television. Okay, that's a lie. I never did my homework and I went straight towards the TV when I got home. But for those of you who didn't sniff markers for fun, there wasn't much time to watch any of these channels, let alone all of them. But there was one day that was prime for children's attention spans. One day that will make Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon compete for your viewership. And that day was Friday nights. School's out for the week. No homework if your teacher's not a douche nozzle, no responsibility left for the week, and now all there is left to do is pick which network you'd be spending your Friday night with. So who'd the audience end up picking? Well, the history of both blocks runs pretty deep. It all started on June 11th of 1999. Cartoon Network was still relatively new. It had only just recently premiered its first original cartoon with The Moxie Show, but really Space Ghost Coast to Coast in 1994. Before that, the network had relied on playing reruns of older, already established cartoons like Tom and Jerry or the Flintstones, just until the network could get their footing. But over at Nickelodeon, they were already the go-to network for animation because of their Nicktoons programming block. Hits like Ren and Stimpy, Doug, Hey Arnold, and quite possibly the biggest cartoon on television at the time, with the Rugrats, changed the way animation was seen as a whole. Nickelodeon made it cool to make cartoons just for the sake of making cartoons, and money, again, rather than sacrificing fluid animation and creativity for the sake of toy sales. And this made Cartoon Network desperate. How could they become the #1 animation network without an animation catalog? So on February 20th of 1995, Cartoon Network created What a Cartoon. Which was pretty much just a compilation series of animated series that were pretty much miniature pilots for possible series on the network. And from there, Cartoon Network became an actual threat to Nicktoons. Cartoon Network was finally becoming the go-to network for cartoons. Dexter's Laboratory, Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, and the freaking Powerpuff Girls. They were creating cartoons that were directly competing with Nickelodeon, and the Nicktoons took notice. Because going forward, both networks would very subtly throw shots back and forth at each other to discourage viewers from going to the other network's channel.
Thanksgiving weekend, you can watch their cartoons, or you can watch Nicktoons all weekend long. New Nicktoon episodes, new Nicktoon music videos, plus the chance to see your very own Nicktoon drawing. So tune out Ordinary Toon and tune in to Non-Stop Nicktoon Weekend next Friday at 12:11 Central, only on Nick.
Back and forth and back, the two networks would fight for who would be the leader in children's animation. But Nickelodeon didn't only create animation. Their cartoons were on the Nicktoons block. Cartoon Network's catalog was just beginning to grow, and they need a new place to show off and premiere these newfound successful series. Because while their channel was quote-unquote all animation all the time, a block to premiere new episodes could really send them over the edge. But in a good way, I think. I'm not actually really sure what that means, but hopefully you get the point. The network wanted to promote their original shows, which takes us back to January 11th of 1999, where Cartoon Network would premiere its first Cartoon Fridays block. They made it so kids didn't just turn the TV on and hope to find something good on, but instead every week kids had something to look forward to on Friday nights. They'd rush home after a week long of school to see new episodes of their favorite shows and bumpers that were made specifically for their weekly event. And I know I've mentioned it in videos before, but they made Cartoon Network and the characters who live within it feel like a community, every week would feature a new host, which was usually a weird pairing of two characters who would otherwise never belong together, but for one night they interact, and in between new episodes they tell us exactly what's coming up next, and they actually interact and speak with each other. And this was huge. I personally remember knowing to turn straight to Cartoon Network every Friday, and most of the kids I knew did as well. Me and my brother, we'll call him Josh, would usually argue over what to watch, and it was almost never Cartoon Network because he didn't like cartoons. But when it was Friday night, even he agreed that Cartoon Network would be on. Cartoon Network Fridays got so big that the network and fans dubbed these specific cartoons the Cartoons, which ain't that original of a name and isn't super ideal, but at this point Cartoon Network was exactly where they wanted to be. For all intents and purposes, Cartoon Network had successfully recreated what Nickelodeon did with Nicktoons, and they didn't even copy them. They just copied their formula, and it worked like a charm. A few years go by and people were still aware of Nicktoons as a brand, and its name was more recognizable than the Cartoons for sure. But it was clear that the respect for Nicktoons as a brand was starting to go downhill, which I've also made a video on, so probably check that out if you want to know more about that. But the viewers like myself were starting to care less and less about the Nicktoons. Cartoons like Hey Arnold, Rugrats, Rocko's Modern Life, and the New Kid at the Block, SpongeBob SquarePants were played all the time. They'd play at random times every day, so if kids wanted to watch them, the chances are if they turned Nick on, they'd probably catch one of those on. But it just wasn't an event. There was no reason to make sure that you were tuning into Nick, especially when you knew that you could just catch reruns at any time. And I know what you're thinking, couldn't you just catch Cartoon Network reruns at any time as well? Well, the simple answer is yes, but the major difference is that once the Friday night was done, the bumpers would go away with it. Cartoon Network makes sure you wanted to tune in to see who's hosting and experience that character interacting with the other character for that one night and that one night only. But once that night ended, so did the event, and the block along with those specific bumpers will be replaced with new ones for the next week. So if your favorite character was hosting, then you'd have to watch that night or miss out on it for good. The strategy was just plain genius, and that pissed Nickelodeon's executives off. So they'd have to come up with a plan to put the Nicktoons back on the map. They'd have to carefully plan a strategic and completely original idea to get kids to tune back into Nickelodeon. So they just completely rip off Cartoon Fridays. And on January 5th of 2001, Nickelodeon premiered Friday Night Nicktoons.
From the Nicktoon Animation Studio in Hollywood.
And when I say they ripped off Cartoon Network, I mean they completely copied their homework down to the last detail. A new night exclusively for Nicktoons with bumpers that would all take place of their pre-existing characters and put them all in one animated community. The goal was the same as their competitors. Give kids a reason to tune in. Give them a set time and, I don't know, give them a set day of the week to tune in so they can spend time with their favorite shows and characters. Make the Nicktoons matter again. After all, they were the channel that changed the way animation was done for a completely new generation, so put some respect on their name. And while the hype was dying down, they still had what was at one time considered to be the most recognizable Nicktoon. But as I said in a previous video, none of that would matter. There's a reason that most of you watching remember Cartoon Fridays, and a lot of you don't remember Friday Night Nicktoons. And believe it or not, that isn't because the block itself wasn't good. Even though it lacked a bit of the personality that Cartoon Fridays did, it wasn't that the viewers weren't tuning in to watch. It wasn't even the fact that they got overshadowed by Cartoon Network's block. The problem was Nickelodeon themselves, and the root of it was an over-reliance on a certain yellow sponge.
anchors away for SpongeBob SquarePants!
I'm ready.
SpongeBob SquarePants finally premieres on Nick this Saturday morning at 10/9 Central. Be there and be square!
Once SpongeBob was released upon the world, it quickly became a network favorite, replacing Rugrats, replacing Hey Arnold. Everything that came before became an afterthought. The type of money SpongeBob made the network became the very reason that Nicktoons as a brand died. Long story short, why play any show other than SpongeBob and have views fluctuate when you could just exclusively play SpongeBob and keep ratings up? High ratings appease advertisers, which keeps the money flowing for Nickelodeon. Don't believe me? Turn on your TV and tell me exactly what's on Nickelodeon right now as we speak. Go ahead and comment it. I guarantee it's SpongeBob. And if it isn't SpongeBob, go and look at your network listings and see exactly what's coming up next. See what's going to be on in an hour. See what's going to be on when you wake up the next morning. Go 2 weeks ahead in the timeline and see what's going to be playing at this exact time, but 2 weeks ahead of time. I guarantee you it's going to be SpongeBob. As the series of the 90s started to end and be phased out for a new generation, Nick didn't really bother trying to search for the next big Nicktoon. Once SpongeBob became a hit, they used it as a crutch and we'd start to see all the other Nicktoons start to phase out. Friday night Nicktoons relied on promoting shows that were ending their runs, and the viewers didn't really care for the shows that they had left. Stuff like Rocket Power just wasn't must-watch content. It seemed like for every Nickelodeon hit that the network lost, Cartoon Network would gain 2 of their own, and it eventually just came too much to handle. Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Lab, Ed, Edd and Eddy, Courage, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Billy and Mandy, Codename Kids Next Door. There was just so much competition and SpongeBob couldn't carry the weight of the block on its own. So on December 17th of 2004, Nickelodeon as well as Nicktoons had had enough. It was time to give up on the Friday night Nicktoons. And the most unfortunate part of it is, this was the time that Nickelodeon decided to give up on animation as a whole. This was the time that they moved every cartoon that wasn't SpongeBob to their sister channel, Nicktoons Network. While the main channel would focus on live-action sitcoms like Drake and Josh and iCarly, which I love, but their focus just wasn't on animation anymore, unless your name was Ninja Turtles or The Loud House. But the party didn't stop over at Cartoon Network, as they take Fridays to much bigger and better levels. Instead of having cartoons host, we move into having live-action hosts Tommy and Tara, who bring joy to millions, as they continue to entertain kids on those special Friday nights. The joy they brought us from the late 90s to the early 2000s would go on until February 23rd of 2007. And in a way, this brought an end of an era for Nickelodeon, and despite being the channel with the highest viewership out of the big 3, this battle will go on to become the only battle that Nickelodeon would lose to Cartoon Network.
Week on Friday Night Nicktoons, on a brand new Jimmy Neutron, you thought the old hall monitor was tough.
I would hate to be hall monitor.
I want to be hall monitor. I want to be hall monitor.
It's Jimmy Neutron!
He is the worst hall monitor ever!
He's gone mad with power!
All this plus, snow falling on starfish. And back-to-back, wand-to-wand episodes of The Fairly Odd Parents. It's Friday Night Nicktoons, tomorrow night starting at 8/7 Central. Only on the First Kids Network, Nickelodeon.
Bye-bye.